Hello, welcome to Life Group. Today we're looking in Numbers as we're reading through the Bible. I need to give a quick shout out to Alex Morris. What's up, homie? Inside joke. Numbers chapter 22. I want us to look through there. If you'll follow along with me, if you turn to Numbers chapter 22, we're going to look at several verses down through that chapter. Today we're talking about Balaam, the error of Balaam, and the subtle ways of Balaam and how he influenced the Israelites. In verse 6, chapter 22 of Numbers, verse 6, Balak is the king, Balaam is the prophet, the seer, used divination. We'll see that in a moment. Essentially, the king was scared. He was a Midianite king. He was scared of the Israelites that were in the land. And so he went to this international seer with quite a reputation. And basically, verse 6 says this: those you bless are blessed, and those you curse are cursed. So if you could find out what the deal is, please curse these people for me. Come over here, we'll pay you. He sent some princes, the whole entourage, to try to persuade Balaam to come and speak a curse against Israel. Now, it is very clear in the reading that God spoke to Balaam, but the following story in the Bible does not support that he was a God-fearing man, as I mentioned a moment ago, and is supported in Joshua chapter 13, verse 22. He used divination, so he didn't seem to be associated with Israel at all, and certainly not God-fearing. So he has the princes, please wait. And in chapter 22, verse 12, God gives him the answer. The Lord Jehovah says, don't go. So they go back. He said, in fact, if the house was filled with silver and gold from Balak, I still wouldn't be able to say anything other than what the Lord gives me. That's in verse 18. But yet he asked again. It doesn't seem as if he was after the gold or silver or riches or notoriety, etc. But then he asked again. And then in verse 20, he asked God, and God gives him permission to go, but God was angry. And that's the famous story of the angel in the roadway and the donkey that knelt, and then Balaam beat him. And then they went into a more narrow path, and the donkey fell down, or I think he brushed against the wall or something like that, and crushed Balaam's foot. Balaam hopped off and beat him. And then the third time it was so narrow that no one could pass, and I guess that's when the donkey fell down and spoke to Balaam. Balaam's eyes were open. He saw the angel, all that. I can try to understand this pagan prophet or the Old Testament God. It makes for good discussion, but I don't usually come up with things that I'm very certain of. I would like to look at Balaam's impact on the people of Israel, because I think that's a human nature characteristic showing our susceptibility. Balaam made 5 particular pronouncements. The first 4 of those were definitely blessing, one even prophetic about David and possibly even Jesus Christ. And then in chapter 24, verse 25, they seemed to part. It said that Balaam went his way, and Balak, a very unsatisfied and angry king, Balak went his way. There are several references throughout the remaining part of the Bible, even into the New Testament, references that refer to Balaam. If you go to chapter 31, verses 7 and 8, in Numbers chapter 31, verses 7 and 8, when the Midianites were destroyed, they were killed, and Israel did actually take over. It lists Balaam in particular as being among them. And then in Numbers chapter 31, verses 15 and 16, I'll read this to you out of the NIV if you'd like to follow along with me. In chapter 15, Moses was angry with these army officers. They'd saved the women as they pillaged the land. He said, have you allowed all the women to live? And then verse 16, this is very interesting. They were the ones who followed Balaam's advice and were the means of turning the Israelites away from the Lord. So Balaam didn't actually curse them. He couldn't curse or bless anything different than what God was giving him, but he figured out a way and then came back to the Midianite king, Balak, and was killed as being among the Midianites, and he gave them this idea. He said, you know what, we can't curse them directly, but if we can infiltrate, if they can marry your women and then worship your gods, and they committed acts of immorality, we can get them. Now, Balaam is listed. I'm going to list a few of these. Deuteronomy 23, verses 3 through 6. Joshua 13:22. Joshua 24, verses 9 and 10. He's in Nehemiah 13, Micah 6. Lots of references throughout the prophets and the chronology of the Old Testament. And then in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 15 and 16, Peter gives us an insight into the motivation of Balaam. And he says this: he loved the wages of wickedness. It gives us an insight that Balaam might have actually been driven by greed. Although he couldn't speak anything that the Lord had not given him, it does appear that he came back. Obviously, he was killed among the Midianites. And then Peter gives us a little bit, not just the action, but he gives us a little bit about the motivation, that he loved the wages of wickedness. In Jude verse 11, it's only one chapter, Jude verse 11, it speaks of following the way of Cain, the way of Balaam, and the way of Korah. We've read all of these, a couple of them very recently. The way of Cain was the way of hatred and murder. The way of Balaam, and this is what Jude says, they rushed for profit into Balaam's error. They rushed for profit into Balaam's error. There was a consuming greed. So if Cain was about hatred and murder, Balaam was about a consuming greed. And finally, Korah, who rose up against God's appointed leadership. The last reading that I would like to share is in Revelation chapter 2. Revelation chapter 2 and verse 14. I thought I was there. Let me slide over my Bible. Revelation chapter 2, verse 14. I'll give you a second to find it as well. Speaks of Balaam again. Nevertheless, I have a few things against you. You have people there who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to entice the Israelites to sin. Now listen to this. This is very insightful. The writer John, in a revelatory moment, unfolds this for us. You have people there who hold to the teaching of Balaam, and this is the teaching of Balaam. He taught Balak the king to entice the Israelites to sin by eating food sacrificed to idols and by committing sexual immorality. It was subtle. It wasn't an outright attack. It was a subtle infection, a subtle compromise. So again, I could try to understand the inner workings of this prophet, and I guess the message there is, don't go for greed if we're looking at Balaam. But what's the message about the people of Israel? I can't really figure out God saying no, letting him go. When I try to get into God's head, like I said, I don't come up with too many things that are certain. His ways are far beyond my ways. And much of that I just have to kind of accept and try to process. But when I look at the human nature component, the susceptibility of the people, that intrigues me. It intrigues me that outright attacks usually get squashed, because as a pastor I see that. When it's an outright satanic, in-your-face attack, we rear up, we rise up, we stomp that out. But a subtlety, like something coming through our television, something coming through a movie, something coming through music, one little flash, one little glance, those things come to us and they catch us. I'd like you to consider the applications and possibly even some lessons learned as you consider the Israelites and the influence of Balaam, who taught Balak to entice the people. I pray you're blessed this week. 2010 prayer, 20 days, 10 seconds of prayer a day, praying for God's outpouring. I love you. Have a great week.